My eyes are going to be on Benjamin Urasek this whole game, Brian. Like that's going to be the guy, man.
Yeah.
We're talking about the passing game here in a
Let's do
second,
it.
right?
Let's do it.
So,
It's a good segue right into that, Ryan. So let's
yeah.
let's let's dive into it. Let's dive into it. Because this is the one area where Stanford can match up with Notre Dame statistically. This is the one area this entire football game from a big pick. And there's like a stat here, a stat there. Just I'm saying overall statistically, on paper, they can match up.
Mm-hmm.
Because Notre Dame has one of the worst touchdown to interception ratios allowed in the country because they only have one touchdown or one interception. We saw that last week. Yep. And part of that, and that's partly why they rank 93rd in pass efficiency defense. Although their pass defense has been good, their pass defense is still giving up, to me, too high of a yards per or a yards per or percentage completion percentage rate. Because of the first two games. But the last three games, it's been much better, much more disruptive. They allowed 70.6 completions in game one, 76.2 in game two, which is terrible.
Yeah.
The 3 games since, they held Cal to 43.2, North Carolina to 53.1, and BYU to 52.9. So they're definitely getting better than what they've been. That's a great sign. That's a great sign. Now, they've got to continue that this week because if you can make Stanford inefficient in the pass game, they have no chance to score. The 100%. Only hope Stanford has in this game is to beat you in the pass game. That means protecting the quarterback, something they have not been good at, and it's even worse now that they're down 2 offensive linemen. Yep. And so that's defense. You talked about the D-line needs to dominate. Foskey needs to dominate. This is an opportunity for Foskey to say, okay, guys, I've been good this year, but not great. It's time for me to take this thing over. Great chance for him to do that. Same with Jason Adamiola to do the same thing. Yep. But they have to be able to handle this. And I'm very curious to see what Al Golden's game plan is going to be because this is a completely different pass game than what they've played all year. Yes. It's more of a West Coast pass offense where David Shaw has adapted his West Coast off. I mean, you're going to see Y Banana. You're going to see all, you're going to see all the West Coast stuff, right? You're going to see Y option. You're going to see all that kind of stuff. But he has adapted his West Coast to fit the fact that the one thing he's been able to consistently get on his team from a recruiting standpoint is giants.
Yes.
Right? And so he's going to do that. What's the plan for that? I'm very curious about that. Does Notre Dame play more cover 2? Do they do more things to help over the top? Like, what's the plan going to be to kind of defend against the size that Stanford brings? Because Notre Dame's been playing teams that had precision route runners and quickness and speed. They haven't played a team that just has size, right? Even Ohio State. I mean, Marvin Harrison's a big kid, but he's more of a speed guy. He's not a guy that Ohio State at the time was just throwing a bunch of jump balls to, although maybe they should have after the catch he had against Michigan State last week. But like they didn't do that against Notre Dame, right? No. North Carolina doesn't really do that. BYU's not that kind of team. They will. You can have blanket coverage on these kids, and Tanner McKee is still going to throw the ball to them.
Yep.
And so what's the plan for that? What's the plan to help for that? But that also goes back to why the box has to be so good against the run, because if you have to start using your safeties to run fit against with the linebackers, if the linebackers don't play a much better game this week, and the safeties have to help as much as they have in recent weeks, and you've got to play a lot of cover 1, a lot of cover 3, Stanford will hurt you on the perimeter with jump balls. I don't care how good your coverage is. And that's the concern. When we talked about Stanford can do things to hurt you, Ryan, this is the area we were talking about.
Yeah. I mean, because they have Elijah Higgins at 6'3", 234 pounds. They have Humphreys, who's a taller player. They have Bryson, last name's escaping me for a second. Bryson, the one that injured himself.
Yeah,
Bryson Tremaine. Yep, Bryson Tremaine, who's a taller player. Michael Wilson is the smaller wide receiver, and he's 6'2", 210, right?
Yes.
Like he's a big boy as well.
So let me read this real quick, Ryan. I'm going to just read the size of their starting lineup. Michael Wilson, 6'2", and I'm going to go smallest to biggest height-wise. Yep. Michael Wilson is 6'2", 210. Elijah Higgins is 6'3", 234. Bryson Tremaine is 6'4", 212. Benjamin Urasek is tight end, 6'4", 242. Their backups, Medea Rubin. I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce it that way, even if it's not, because I think that's just flipping hilarious. That looks like someone's name is Medea. 6'2", 209. Silas Starr is 6'2", 221. John Humphreys, who plays a decent amount, is 6'5", 209. And their backup tight end, Sam Roush, is 6'5", 245.
Yes.
Their smallest guy is 6'2", 209. That's. I mean, yes, they're big. They're big,
huge.
and they move okay. I mean, these aren't like tall, slow guys either. I mean, they're not burners, but these are guys that are good athletes for their size.
Yes,
as well.
I mean, like I wrote in the preview of a couple of their offensive standouts. I mean, I wrote that Elijah Higgins has pretty good explosiveness for his size, right? Like he's not going to run by you, but he can get on top of a guy and have some leverage to win down the football field, right? Like those are this is what Stanford has. Brian, it's interesting because I wanted to have this conversation with you that you say, what is Al Golden going to do? What's his game plan going to be? This is what I am interested to see from that perspective, right? So you have a bunch of wide receivers that can win some jump balls, can win some contested catches, but they're not after catch players, right? Like Michael Wilson's the only guy that gives you a little bit, in my opinion, of the mainstays, a little something after the catch. Even he doesn't give you like a ton, but he gives you a little bit, right? So
he can catch and run too, right? He's the one guy that you worry about, like, catching. If he gets a step on you on a cross, he can, not lose that ground. And so, yes, in that regard, that to me is catch and run as well.
100%.
But not make you miss. There's
exactly.
To your point.
This is not a yak team, right? This is not like a yards after catch. You're going to make you miss in space, break a ton of – I mean, they'll break some tackles because they're huge, but they're not going to turn a medium gain into an explosive play usually, right? Like they're usually we're going to catch the ball where we are and we're going to gain maybe a couple more yards, and that's going to kind of be the impact of what our impact is in general, right? So you put that into the conversation of, hey, offensive line has not been very good. They've given up a lot of sacks, 16 on the season, ranks 107th in the nation. And also you're down to your offensive lineman. One is, arguably your best. I mean, whether you want to, I think it's Miles Hinton, but like if you want to say Walter Rouse is the best Stanford offensive lineman, like cool. We can have that conversation. I'm good with that. But so you have an offensive line that's struggling with injuries on top of it. You have a quarterback that's a statue, right? Like he is not moving out of the pocket. And you have wide receivers that can't really hurt you getting into space and creating explosive plays.
And with pure stretch. Pure stretching you, yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, okay, if we get a pressure, if Notre Dame gets early pressure on Tanner McKee, is there a player where like, they hit a quick spot on an underneath route and then he's able to explode for 50 yards? Like there's nobody on that side, right, for me. So I'm curious, Brian, like, because I always talk about it like almost every week, how Notre Dame getting home with 4 is so important because they have guys up front that gives you that opportunity potentially. I'm curious if Al Golden is more aggressive from a blitzing perspective this week. I am really curious about that. I don't know if that's the answer. I don't know if that's what he's going to go for. I don't know what his ideology on it's going to be, but I'm interested with the injuries to the offensive line, with the wide receivers that aren't going to create a ton of explosive plays after the catch, and a quarterback that is not the fleetest of foot. I'm curious to see if he just says, hey, we're going to bring a little more pressure than maybe we have been in some weeks, because we know if we get quick pressure on this team, they're probably not going to do well against it. Just my thought process.
I personally, because of what we talked about, the other things, I would say, let's see if we can get pressure with our front 4.
Yep.
I would do no more than, like on first and second down, I'm doing run stunts, which then turn into, I mean, that's kind of how you should teach it, right? A run stunt, like you hit the gap, and if you see pass, you run through it and you get to the quarterback. I mean, you don't just stop like, oh shoot, they're not running. I guess I can just hang out right here, right? You have a responsibility to run through to the back. Could be that responsibility, run through to the quarterback. I would do maybe some run stunts early downs, but even then, this is a game where I want to dare Stanford to run the football on me. And so I'm going to play my linebackers on normal depth. I'm not going to do a lot of triggering. On third and longs, they've done a lot of pressures. I'm not doing that this game. Honestly, I'm going to play cover this game, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm making the throwing lanes to the big guys as sort of crowded as possible. Because here's why. If I got a 6'3" Elijah Higgins running against Jaden Mickey, assuming Tariq Bracy doesn't play, or even Tariq Bracy if he plays in that matchup, and honestly, this is going to sound terrible. Never want Tariq Bracy to get hurt, but the timing of it actually works out for Notre Dame. To me, this is going to be a game where Tariq either was going to play a ton or he's going to play outside, and he is the worst matchup that Notre Dame has in this game. Because what's the one thing Tariq has always struggled with? Big guys that they throw jump balls to, and there's nothing. He's like 5'10". There's nothing to do about it.
Yep.
So this wasn't going to be a game. This is a Clarence Lewis game. This is a Benjamin Morrison game, a Cam Hart game, in my opinion. So do you put one of those bigger guys inside if you're going to go nickel? Or do you say, hey, look, we're going to let Jack Kaiser match up against Elijah Higgins? I don't love that matchup either. Maybe you do some things where you get a safety down in the box. Maybe you say, hey, look, we're going to put Ramon Henderson in the slot this week. I don't know what the answer is from a personnel standpoint, but philosophically, Ryan, this is a game where I am going to say we're going to cloud up the throwing lanes as much as possible, and we're going to trust our defensive line to dominate. Now, if they can't, then I have some stuff we've worked on from a triggering standpoint where I can then say, okay, let's heat them up a little bit.
Right.
But if you get into that situation, you're going to be in trouble. Because what I think is if you do that with your backers, then that allows your safeties to then do a little bit more over the top to protect against some of the outside stuff. So I can play cover 2, allow Cam Hart, allow Benjamin Morrison, allow Clarence Lewis to be a little bit more aggressive at the line, get them off their tracks. That's the reason the thing I like about cover 2 against bigger receivers. The danger is the cover 2 hole throws when you have an NFL arm at quarterback, and they have an NFL arm at quarterback, right? So, but to me, the Notre Dame has the length to kind of somewhat protect against that. I am playing cover 2, and I'm really making sure that if I'm Al Golden, Mike Mickens, that I'm teaching them to ride that, get underneath that vertical release by number 2. But I want you to be physical against that guy, slow down their releases, and then I think if you're able to do that, then it can be success. I would also, this is going to sound a little strange, I'd play my cover 2 from tighter depth. Because I don't think you need to be 12 to 15 and then bam, getting off of the top, because they don't have the burners on the outside. So I'd play it from a little bit tighter depth because, again, it's all about clouding up the windows as much as I can. And if Stanford wants to try to beat me with bombs, then that's fine. Brandon Joseph can get back over top of that from 10 yards. You know what I mean, Ryan? So those are some things that I would do because I'm dropping my linebackers. This is a great game where Maris Luafau should be able to use his length to his advantage. It's a game where Prince Colley can use his speed and length to his advantage. And then honestly, a guy that I would play a bunch this week would be Junior Tuihalamaka. I would play him a bunch this week at Mike with JD Bertrand and say, your guys' job, you're playing with the line. You see run, you crash it. Right. And then then I'd play Jack Kaiser more outside this game. Let him protect against the tight ends and things like that, and then use your safeties to help protect against some of your backside safety. So I'm not saying I'm playing all cover 2. I'd play some 4. I'd play some roll. The point being is I'm going to use my safeties a little bit to be prepared to help against some of those outside one-on-ones. But I'm trying to funnel them back inside with my alignment, and then I'm using my linebackers to then get depth. Because one of the hardest defenses to throw on, in my opinion, is a cover 2 defense that gets pressure with its front 4. Because the weakness to cover 2, in my opinion, is down the field. I can do things against you down the field. I can attack the middle of the field. I can hit those down the field hole throws. I can do things where I can level a linebacker and things like that. But those things all take time. Cover 2, to me, it was designed first and foremost to protect against the quick game, right? We're going to take the quick game away. Well, Stanford will run some quick game. They run a decent amount of quick game. You're prepared. You're going to take away the Y options, the slides, the stuff like that, the now screens. You're taking that away. And then if you can then get pressure with your front 4, that means you can drop all 3 of your linebackers into your zones, into your hook curls, into your middle of the fields and things like that, which means now the intermediate stuff is also clogged up a little bit. And now I've got to try to attack down the field a little bit more. Well, that's harder to do when you've got your front 4 getting the pressure on you. So that's why, Ryan, for me, I'm going to come out and give my front 4 an opportunity to dominate this game. If they can't, then I have some answers for it. But if they can dominate this game, especially in the pass game, Ryan, and you're dropping 7 into coverage, they're going to have a hard time. And you know who did this? You know who did this defense perfectly against a team with big receivers? Stanford. This is exactly what Stanford did to Notre Dame in 2010. Because Notre Dame's 2 best receivers were who? Michael Floyd. They had, at the time, Kyle Rudolph was still playing. Tyler Eifert, who hadn't really caught a lot of balls. Duval Kamara was playing a decent amount for that team as well. And so what Stanford did is they rushed 4, dropped 7, or rushed 3, dropped 8. Because they knew they could shut down Notre Dame's run game with their box. And then they took away all the quick game because Notre Dame was running a lot of quick game, a lot of intermediate stuff. They were able to take Michael Floyd out of the game just by their alignments, and Notre Dame didn't have the time to get the ball down the field. I think it's a very similar game plan to what Notre Dame should employ against Stanford this weekend and dare them to run the ball. If Stanford's going to try to beat you running the ball, then this should be a blowout. So yes. Good question, Ryan. Now, what would you do? I mean, would you be more aggressive with it?
I'm in between on it. I kind of like the aggressiveness side of things, but like I guess maybe my holdback to buying completely into playing coverage is that when we've seen Notre Dame play cover 2 and other zone coverages, I feel like they haven't been as aggressive passing guys off as they need to be, right? Like they're not contacting enough. They're not being vocal enough to who's vacating zones, who's coming into zones. If Notre Dame was better at it, I would be like, yeah, man, let's play cover 2 all day because it makes complete sense to your point, right? Like it would make it extremely difficult. I just think of like last week when I'm like, okay, they're playing cover 2 there, and then they just kind of let a guy loose, right? It's just, or 2 weeks ago, where I'm just like, it's just bad communication, man. And Clarence Lewis, the one against North Carolina, the long one, like he was in cover 2 and he just let the guy just go straight by him. Like he didn't contact him at all. I'm like, you need to contact and be vocal, man. Like you have to communicate on the back end. If Notre Dame was better at that, I would be like, yeah, I agree 100% with you. I'm just struggling a little bit just because we have seen some inconsistencies in that area, just a little bit.
And then, we talk about get right games, right? You're going to have to be able to do that. You're going to have to be able to have those. You're going to have to be able to play more zone at times. You're going to have to. So get better at it. Practice 100%. It. Because here's the thing. If you're going with the game plan that I'm talking about, that means you're getting 1,000,000 reps at it this week in practice.
Sure.
Right. And so, and then, hey, Coach Mickens, Coach O'Leary, we got to really focus on this. Coach Mick, what's the point of emphasis this week? Really doing a better job of contact and then riding through the turn. That's what they're not doing a great job of in cover 2 is it's about being physical and then riding through the turn. Because what happens is a lot of corners on cover 2, they'll like get a jam. And then when they turn around because what they're playing is zone, they're going to play underneath the vertical route until they're threatened outside.
Yep.
And so you're basically bracketing high-low that outside receiver. Well, what a lot of corners struggle with is they will lose guys in that turn. And that's where teams will kind of hit that hole throw. So the thing I'm focusing on this week is really, making that initial contact and then riding through the turn to then see if there's somebody coming back inside, right? And if you don't see it, then you keep working with them. But if you don't ride them through the turn, then you're going to lose the guy. Now I'm chase mode, and now I got to go find him. And that's how they're going to hit those 6'3" high back shoulder cover 2 hole throws, right? In front of Houston Griffith and DJ Brown and those guys, right? So that would be my point of emphasis for the corners this week. And you've got the corners to do it. I mean, Cam Hart should be great at that. Should be. Benjamin Morrison should be really good at that. He's a pretty physical kid in coverage. It's something Clarence Lewis should be a master of. I mean, that's something he needs to be a master of because that's
just like Julian Love was, man.
Was brilliant at that. Correct.
Yeah.
So, and then also you can keep things in front of you and close on the quick game. If they want to throw some slides at you, your corners are there to drive on it and break those things up. So, yeah, it's not something they've been good at. I think you're absolutely right. That's maybe another, and I didn't think about this, but it actually adds to me wanting to do this more because that means 1,000,000 reps at it. And, you get better at it. Do some of it next week against UNLV and really make it a point of emphasis because I also think it's a philosophy that you're going to want to have against Syracuse as well.
Yeah.
And so
they have some size as well. Wide receiver.
Have some size, but also they're a run-oriented team.
Yeah.
And so that would be something to allow you to to be able to effectively handle that. So good question, Ryan. Very good question, because this is the matchup. That is the concern. This is it. If Stanford's going to pull off an upset of this game, or even more so make it a game, it's going to be because of this part of the game. It will. And USC was able to limit their effectiveness in the pass game really well, and they did it with pressures. Like they got good pressure, got their hands up, and Tanner McKee had a really off game. They just never let Tanner McKee get in rhythm, and that was a big part of that game, a really big part of that game. And but the biggest thing is how many sacks they had in that game? 5.
Wow.
All right, and that's one area where USC's been a lot better than I anticipated. They've been a pretty good pressure team this year. They dialed up a lot of pressures. They did it a little bit differently. They dialed up pressures against Stanford, and it worked. But to me, that's just not the route that I would go. Because I also think Stanford missed a lot of opportunities against USC. I mean, you worked that game. There's a lot of chances for Stanford to make plays in that game. They just didn't execute real well.
I mean,
So,
I think the formula to your point is Washington, right? Washington was
Mhm.
getting home with 4 all
Yeah.
day against Stanford. Like
Yeah.
they could not block those defensive ends. So,
Yeah.
yep, it's gonna be
And I
interesting to see.
would argue that was their most convincing loss. That and Oregon were their two most convincing losses. I mean, they actually moved.
Yeah.
I mean, USC scores early, and Stanford goes right down the field and gets in. And Tanner McKee throws an interception on when he tried to do one of those back shoulder things, but he threw it low, so it got tipped up in the air and picked off and ran out of the end zone. Right? I mean, they had 2 red zone turnovers in that game.
And he almost, if I remember correctly, on that drive where he threw that interception, didn't they almost complete a throw in the back of the end zone for a touchdown?
Yes.
Right, that was just ruled
I
out of
think
bounds.
It was that drive.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah, I think I remember.
I
that
believe
one.
it was that drive. But there was a lot of opportunities against USC to get more points.
Yes.
They were not in the Washington or Oregon games, in my opinion, especially the Washington game. So yes, because that's supposed to be the best part of your team, right? I mean, I would sit there. Hey, Washington. What I would have done. It's a little too late now because it's Wednesday. But what I would have done is yesterday before practice, I'd have let Coach Washington know, hey, I'm coming into your meeting at the very beginning, just letting you know. Let Coach Laurinaitis handle the linebackers for a little bit. You got him just at the beginning. And I say, listen, fellas, you've got to be the foundation of our defense. This game, our game plan, I'm putting a lot of it on you guys. Our game plan doesn't work if you guys don't dominate. And I'd put it on them. They're veterans. They got to be able to handle that. I need you guys to be on top of your games. I need you to be locked in, because if you guys are locked in, you guys are gonna take this game over. And I think they need that kind of game. I think now the defensive line, and we have a question about that in the mailbag. Defensive line's played a lot better the last 3 games, especially against the pass rush. They've got to be at their best in this game, because if they can be, they don't have to be, but if they are, then Notre Dame, they have to be at their best in this game if Notre Dame's going to dominate.
Yeah,
that's my whole point. If they dominate the point of attack, then this game is just not going to be close. And that's the weirdest thing about the Stanford team. Like, Notre Dame should, based on what we've seen on paper and on film, should dominate Stanford in the trenches. And if you want to know why Stanford has faded in the last 5 years, that statement right there sums up what happened to Stanford.
Yep. There's no David DeCastro walking through that door, man. There's no
just the attitude. But see, the thing is, they're on the roster.
It's fair.
But they're not playing that way.
Right.
I mean, Miles Hinton is exactly the kind of guy that you expected Stanford to have 10 years ago. Big. I mean, he's I would argue he's more talented than Andres Pete, just athletically.
Oh yeah.
Right? But he doesn't play that way. He doesn't play the way Josh Garnett played. He doesn't play the way David DeCastro is the ultimate of that. He doesn't play the way Nate Herbig did early in his career before all the injuries set in, right? He doesn't play that way. And that's the thing. But it's the whole line, and it's been that way for years, and that's why Notre Dame should dominate this matchup.
Well, I was gonna say, Brian, like, I mean, think about, like you said, the last few years. I mean, they underdeveloped Foster Sorrell. They underdeveloped Walker Little. They've underdeveloped a lot of pretty talented offensive linemen over the years, which is pretty wild to think about.